These interviews are in partnership with BTCC Blueprints. Go check them out, they sell all sorts of brilliant merchandise from t-shirts to posters and much more. You can visit their website using the link in the description below. Welcome mini racer Max Coates, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Louis. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. Thank you for coming on and joining me. It'll be great to have a quick chat with you. So, when did you start racing?
I started racing sort of properly when I was 8 in karts. So I'd sort of done a little bit before that, but nothing proper. Just a bit of fun. And then it all got a bit more serious when I was sort of 14, 15 and made a move to Ginetta Juniors. So it's and then it's been great fun since then.
What would you say got you into racing to start with? Whether it was just spectating to start with, or were there anyone that really got you into it?
Yeah, would definitely have said it was my dad. He used to do rallycross, so in terms of going to watch racing and stuff, it was kind of done from an early age. First of all, I got on a motorbike. That was my first thing, and I don't think I really had the bottle for racing a motorbike, so ended up getting a kart and loved that. And then, to be honest, starting racing was a bit of a mistake. We just went along to a test day, and they happened to be doing the licenses. Flute / dad helped me through the test, and then started racing and haven't looked back since.
And you obviously said a minute ago that you started for doing the Ginetta Junior Championship. Obviously, that's, I presume, where you started racing in cars?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of got to the end of karting 14, 15, like I sort of said, and to be honest, I just kind of wasn't enjoying it anymore. Spent a lot more time getting knocked off than we did having any success or really enjoying it. And when you're sort of pushed off on the first lap of just about every race, kind of just gets a bit just not fun. And we wanted to reignite that into our racing, and that was what we did by going and doing Ginetta Juniors. And I think, what sold it to us was car racing was more exciting and accessible to sponsors, and the cost to run a Ginetta Junior as a privateer was comparable to the cost of running a kart once you had the car. We got stuck into Ginetta Juniors, went see how we go. We try and get some sponsorship together, and fortunately, certainly the last few years, been very lucky and successful with that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned with the karting where you weren't enjoying it. Would you still say that's the best way to start in racing, or is it worth to wait a few more years and jump into cars?
No, 100% getting a kart. For me, I got to a point in national level competition where I think without spending more time and money, there wasn't more success going to happen or come. And we realised that, but still enjoyed it to that point. And then I think that year, about half the races, I got knocked off on the first lap. Just not fun. And we go racing to enjoy it and have a good time. And if we're not, then we shouldn't be doing it. And I wasn't. So, but by the same token, the karting taught me a lot. I did thousands of races in karts and it teaches you how to race, how to be with fellow competitors, how to do a first corner, a start, a last lap, a last corner. Do you lunge the guy? Do you sit behind him? Do you go to the outside? Do you go to the inside? Do you block pass? All of those things. How to drive in the wet, what it's like to try and find the grip, what it's like to try and set a cart up and make changes to things, and all of that is useful in car racing. But you've just got to learn that in karts. It's the best place to learn it. But what I would say is once you've learnt those things and once you sort of fairly comfortable, you've done that job, that's the right time to make the move to cars.
And obviously, like you said, you started in the Ginetta Junior Championship. What was that like to drive in, and would you recommend it?
Yeah, I'd definitely recommend it. I think it's the best junior series out there. It's not the cheapest junior series out there, but then again, being the best, it isn't always going to be. So yeah, it maybe isn't achievable for everybody. That said, there's the Ginetta Junior Scholarship, and that is accessible to a lot of people. Or certainly more accessible. And yeah, it's a fantastic championship, and surely without it, we wouldn't be having this conversation today, and I wouldn't have achieved everything that I have done certainly in the last few years if I hadn't done the Ginetta Junior Championship back in 2010 and 2011.
And obviously, what are the Ginettas like to drive?
They've changed quite a bit actually over the last decade. So the 10 years ago, they used to be on a H pattern gearbox.
Yeah.
But jumping from karts to cars, that was probably the biggest thing to try and get your head around. Where now they're on a sequential gearbox, so there's a stick, you pull or you push. I've done that the right way around, so that's good. And to go up or down the gears, and yeah, you have to do a little bit with lifting off the accelerator pedal and blipping on a downshift, but it's a lot less technical than what it was to use a H pattern gearbox, and that is probably the biggest way in which they've changed. They've changed brakes and bits on sort of certain things over the years, but yeah, as a car, that's kind of been probably the main change. And to drive, they're leery little things, quite unique. You've got to be on the power very early with them, and set it up so that you're driving onto each straight as hard and early as possible, and that's really the key to the little Ginetta Junior.
And they obviously provide brilliant racing as well, so that's always good to see.
Probably the best to watch on Toka, if you really ask me. If I could somehow fool you that I was 14, I would happily go and do it again. So,
Really?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So where did you go after you did Ginetta Juniors?
I stayed within the Ginetta family, really. So I went to the Ginetta G50, which isn't really a car that's kind of sold anymore in the mainstream. So it's essentially like the little sister of the G55 that you see on the Ginetta Super Cup grid now. And yeah, that is like a 300 brake horsepower car. I'm trying to search around, see if I've got a picture of it anyway. But yeah, it's 300 brake horsepower, mega car. Absolutely love that. And then went to a Ginetta G55. The guest driving a Porsche Super Cup, also Porsche Carrera Cup, and also around in British touring cars before I kind of came back onto the Clio scene, which is probably where I'm sort of most known from for the last few years.
And especially like from the Ginetta Juniors, how much of a big step was that compared to driving the juniors?
Huge. I bricked it the first time I drove
Really?
a Ginetta.
Yeah.
It was so much faster, so much louder, and slicks are just alien when you first get on them. They're cold when you start and they feel horrendous, and then once they switch on and get temperature, they're the best things ever. And yeah, they're cool, really. And that's the biggest thing to get your head around is the grip from the slicks and how they're awful when they're cold.
Yeah, it's they're such good cars. I think Ginetta as well, and like I say, they're all the racing they do is brilliant. I think
They're brilliant bits of kit, and probably not necessarily underrated, but I think as a championship that's probably not seen as much. Ginetta GT5 Challenge is awesome. Great cars, great championship, good racing, and you know, you watch any of that, it's fantastic racing.
Yeah, definitely. And once you finished Ginetta Juniors, lots of drivers do this. They go over to single seaters often. Obviously, with British F4. Did you ever consider that?
No, to be honest. I went to the launch, but I never really had any interest in going single seaters. The budget needed is more, and really, if you're just going racing for fun and you've got plenty of money to go and spend, then great, go and do single seaters. If you're doing it because you want to make a career as a Formula One driver, or maybe at the top of prototypes, then you would go single seater route. But quite honestly, unless you're aiming for Formula One, there's not a reason to do it. Is my view. And yeah, you know, that you've got to sort of weigh up the cost versus the benefit, and it wasn't there for me with single seaters.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I was just wondering because it's either your thing or it's not really. And like you say, obviously financially, it's a lot more than other championships.
Yeah, and I'm quite realistic. I haven't got the budget to go and race in Formula One, so there's no point trying to kid yourself that that's going to happen if you know that it's not. So yeah, it just never really was of interest. I'd love to drive one. I'd love to have a go in a Formula 4 car or a Formula 3 car at some point, just on a test day, just to say I've done it.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of racing them, there isn't really the interest there.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to compare like a Formula 3 or a Formula 4, like you mentioned, to something like a Renault Clio or one of the mini challenge cars.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of cars, like within British Touring Car paddock, I don't think anybody's driven more different cars, certainly within the sport, not necessarily within in touring cars itself. But yeah, in terms of support paddock, as I have, sort of driven the Ginetta Junior, Ginetta G50, Ginetta G55, Porsche Carrera Cup in the generation before what it is now, and in this generation, the Clio Cup car. Although I've had a little go in a Gen 3, but more in the Gen 4 cars. Yeah, and also British touring car, both front and rear wheel drive. So there's not that many people who have driven all of those cars, and the only one I haven't done is a single seater. So it'd be quite cool just to give it a go, but not really with the interest of racing it.
Yeah, definitely to get it off the bucket list.
Exactly that. Yeah. Maybe I should do a race in it just to be able to pick it off. But I think that would be all it is really intended for.
And obviously, you mentioned a little while ago that you did some time in British touring cars. How did that come about?
It's a fairly long story.
Okay.
But essentially, when there's a guy called Malcolm Smith who's a driver coach, and he was working for the Support Our Powers team. He told me that there might have been an opening coming up because and sort of recommended that I'd be the guy for the job, which was mega, to be honest, because at that point I'd had a couple of years doing like one-off drives, and that weekend probably set me up to do what I've now done with the Clios and stuff. So yeah, but a guy called Malcolm Smith, he said, look, Max is a man for the job. Get him in the car. You know, a bit of a chat with Derek Palmer, who ran the team, and yeah, agreed a deal in terms of financial input, and then needed to put that together, which we did in a couple of weeks. And then, yeah, got the deal together to race at Croft. And unfortunately, that was the only round I did. But yeah, it was a mega experience.
Was it always something you wanted to do?
Maybe not always from being in karts, but once I stepped through to Ginetta Juniors, yes, definitely. I'd be lying if I said that, you know, when I was 10, my dream was to go and race in British touring cars. You know, I just wanted to go karting. So, but you know, when I made the move to Ginetta Juniors and sort of, I guess things became a little bit more serious, then you know, for sure, the touring car ambition was really what I wanted.
And I believe you drove the Infinity.
Yeah, I did.
Obviously the
So
slightly older generation. For what on the
yeah,
grid? What's on the grid now?
yes, it'd be on the GPRM, you know, spec of car rather than the current RML kit that's on the. Oh, I got that the wrong way around. I can't remember now. But anyway, I drove it in a slightly different guise to what it is now. And to be honest, I was gutted that I didn't get to continue because I could see the potential that the car had, and it wasn't there at the time. The long story short, the car didn't brake very well, and the rear end was slightly disconnected, or was disconnecting whenever it fancied, really. So when you hit the brakes, you couldn't stop in the same amount of time as, say, the Hondas that were probably the benchmark car or the BMW at the time. So, you know, if their stopping distance was from there to there, mine had to be from there to there. So you couldn't brake.
Right.
But when you also got to the end of the braking phase, the car hadn't pitched enough. There wasn't enough roll into the front because the team didn't have the finance to be able to get this
Right, I see.
on the car. Now, the problem with that meant that it didn't turn as quick. So any advantage that you had by being a rear-wheel drive car and getting the car turned, squatted down and driven wasn't happening because it didn't have this feature. And there was another two inherent problems. One was the rear end kept coming loose because there was just a problem that we had in getting the car to sort of essentially stay together. And the power steering kept cutting out. So you go through a corner and then the steering wheel would just lock in place, which is a bit disconcerting, really, when you're doing 150 mile an hour and you turn it into a corner and then locked, nothing else. So, yeah, I think the last race in British Touring Cars, my best lap was a second off Andy Prio's.
Right.
And I don't think I'm admitting anything that people probably don't already know, but in 2015, having had a year out of the car, I was definitely not as good a driver as Andy Prio. 100% wasn't. You know, I was out of a car for 12 months before I jumped in. He's a 3 or 4 time world touring car champion. I was more than a second slower than he was driving around the track myself, and the car was already there with quite a few problems. So to me, the hallmarks were all there for that Infinity to be quite a fantastic car, really.
Yeah, and obviously a slightly newer car, like I said, but look where the Infinity is now, I guess, with Laser Tools and Ash Sutton.
Yeah, 100%. And just gutted that I never got the chance to show it could do that back then.
Absolutely, and obviously you said there was some difficulties with the car. Even without them, how difficult was it to drive? And I presume a massive step up from Ginetta's and other stuff.
I think the biggest thing is the format of the race weekend and how many buttons are in the car. So
really,
in comparison to anything else I'd driven, there was just so many more switches and things that you had to turn on, or power steering settings, and just kind of a maze of different things that you had to try and get your head around in a British touring car. And also just the weekend format is a bit different to what I'd been used to. The practice sessions are a lot of preparation for the races, which sounds pretty obvious, but it's not necessarily all about going flat out as fast as you could, which is kind of what is in the other formulas. There's a bit of that in terms of trying to go as quick as what you can and learn about the car, where in British touring cars there's a bit more in terms of tyre prep and systems checks and that sort of thing that just wasn't what I was used to from other things.
Yeah, it's very different to everything else, I guess.
Yeah, it is. They were a cool car to drive, and yeah, they're a bit different in their current spec. They're a lot what we would say leery, so a lot more probably nervous to drive is the best way to explain. So I think the inputs that you do, particularly through the wheel and the brake pedal, are a lot more sensitive to making the car react in comparison to what they were back then.
Yeah, definitely. And you obviously said earlier that obviously lots of people know you from the Renault Clio Cup. When did you decide to go and race in that?
That kind of followed on fairly naturally from the touring cars. So when we raced in BTCC, there was when I had the weekend that I didn't do the following time at Snetterton. There was a lady that we met that weekend who ended up buying a Ginetta for me to race the following year. We then spoke to Sicily Motorsport about trying to do something sponsorship wise with their sponsors in British touring cars to run a team in the support championships. And they said, we're interested in doing something in the Clio Cup, but not in the Ginettas. And that was more or less how the Clio started. So I had to make a very difficult phone call and ask somebody who just bought me a Ginetta if they would sell that and buy a Clio instead. And yeah, we managed to go along that route and then go and race in Clios. So yeah, the intention was really back in 2016 to have been racing a Ginetta rather than a Clio. And then things changed, and I've really enjoyed my time in the Clio Cup, to be honest.
Yeah, and obviously they're great cars, always provide great racing, and I presume much easier to drive than a British touring car.
Yeah, they are a bit more stable. I think a lot of people, when they first get in them, would sort of say that the Clios are a fairly difficult thing to drive and are quite
Really?
quite a handful to get on top of. But I think having driven a few other things, really with the minis and the British touring cars afterwards, the Clio seems a bit more tame, really.
Yeah, it's funny because they're such small cars, but obviously I've heard lots of drivers say they are quite difficult to actually race.
Yeah, the nimble little things, and they take a lot of time to get their temperature in the rear tyres, which is why you would see so many accidents on the first few laps. But yeah, they were awesome cars to race, bumper to bumper, door handle to door handle, and yeah, you could get good slipstreams. Yeah, as a car to race, they were fantastic.
And what would you say was the best thing about being on the Toka package?
It's either the TV coverage or the fans, and I couldn't really tell you which one it is, because I think both are part and parcel of the same thing. I think without the TV coverage, there wouldn't be the fans and spectators that there is, and without the fans having the interest in it, there wouldn't be the TV coverage either. So it's a mix between those two things. But in terms of being on a support race to it, in terms of the actual on-event experience, it's definitely the spectators. And I think we felt that even more in 2020 when we weren't able to have any. But yeah, the TV coverage is pretty phenomenal too.
So obviously 2020 you moved to the mini challenge. Obviously that came in and replaced the Clio Cup. Were you disappointed that the Clios were moving off of the Toka package?
Yeah, I was, to be honest. The Clios for me were a great car. I really enjoyed driving them. They were cost effective to run. They weren't cheap, but they weren't. They were very reliable and sensibly costed to allow people to be able to get into support classes to British touring cars, and above all else, the racing was really second only to Ginetta Junior Championship in terms of what I've raced. I've not done enough in British touring cars to be able to vouch for it, if that makes sense, in terms of the racing pedigree against something like that. But yeah, there's races that I've had in Clio Cup that are just outstanding, and only really compare to what I did in Ginetta Juniors.
And why did you choose to move to obviously the Mini? I presume being on the Toka package helped, and did you ever think about staying in the Clios?
The reason to go with the Minis was because it was the progression follow on from the Clios. If the Clio Cup was still the front wheel drive support race slot to British touring cars, then I would still be doing Clio Cup. But that's just the nature of the beast and how things change over time. So yeah, the Minis were a natural sort of progression from the Clios, and as a high level support championship to British touring cars, it was the place that I felt I should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And how would you say your 2020 season went?
Mixed. I was going to say rubbish, but
right.
I think that would be letting a few things tint it, really. There was a number of high points. I had a great time working with Elite Motorsport. They were a fantastic bunch of people and did a really good job. And quite truthfully, I feel a little bit unlucky that we didn't get more from it. And if events had gone a bit differently, primarily at Knockhill, I think my answer to that question would have been really quite different. But truth be told, we did pretty well at Donington Park. We had a race win, which was mega. The second round of the season was just didn't go to plan, and that ruined round 3. And then where do we go after that? Snetterton was okay, but was predominantly behind a safety car, and Brands Hatch is probably one that I messed up myself. So when you kind of going through a 5-round championship and 2 rounds are effectively ruined by things that you can't necessarily control, and is a judicial opinion or whatever, is it tints a season massively.
Yeah, absolutely. And what advice would you give to any racing drivers on how to cope having a bad weekend? Because it happens, obviously, like you say, often it's out of your control, whether it's whatever it is. So
think before you say anything.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to just say, I just don't need to talk at the moment, especially when you're in something that's so highly televised, like what we are in the Toka Support Championships. And just make sure that you've got good people around you, and by that I don't necessarily mean highly skilled people in your team. I mean people whose opinion and company you really appreciate, because those are the people that will get you through when you have the dark days and the bad times, which inevitably happen in motorsport.
Yeah, and I know you've said there was obviously high points and low points of the season, but were you pleased you raced in the mini challenge?
Yeah, I think all in all, it was not a bad year. I think the difficulty is that I've been in contention for a Clio Cup championship for 3 years on the bounce, and really this year, after the 5th race of 13, I wasn't in contention anymore, and I don't know, 6th race of 13, I wasn't in contention, and that's, yeah, it slightly changes the dynamic of how it feels to go racing and as to what you are there to achieve. yeah, that did change things a bit.
Yeah, well, you've been absolutely brilliant. I won't take too much of your time. Just to finish off, have you got any plans for this season, or are we not allowed to hear yet?
Rough plans. They're not concrete or sorted yet by any stretch of the imagination. The plan was to go and do British touring cars.
Really?
Nobody really knows this yet, but until 2 days ago, that was still very much the plan. Sponsor pulled out, and that's not going to happen. So that's the rough and tumble world that we're in motorsport. So yeah, until 2 days ago, the plan was very much British touring cars. Unfortunately, COVID has just meant that the business is uncertain at the moment and doesn't want to commit to funding what is several £100,000 in British touring cars, and I've got to respect, and I totally understand why that is. So it's not going to happen for me into British touring cars this year, but maybe it will in 2022. There's options on the table in a few different places for this year for me, but it's just understanding what they are and what they bring commercially to my partners, and where they want to be as well as where I want to go. So the plans will be out fairly soon. I would think by the end of January we'll have a pretty good understanding as to what's going on. But until then, it's thrashing it all out on phone calls and emails and working out where we're going to be.
Well, obviously, yeah, we'd love to see you in British touring cars, and whatever you're up to this year, we'll be following you definitely.
Thanks, Louis, and well done on doing this. I think it's great that you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on, and yeah, you've been brilliant. So yeah.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Well, right. See you soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye bye.